So we'll perhaps settle somewhere under this lovely ancient olive tree, which roots are just as impressive as the branches that spread around as this magnificent, nothing short of ordinary shelter, just giving you that rotating pan to get it in fully. There we go. I'll just sit somewhere down here. Been sitting here for a while on this spot, thinking what to say, submerged into this sound of nature, birds, buzzing bees, flies and butterflies. And the more one sits like that, the less there is a propensity to wanting to speak anything. So, how do we reconcile this here, being in one's own bubble, immersed in one's own world, providing one has managed to create something as insulating as what would make one feel secure and somehow invincible in the face of what's unfolding right now. So in sharing these reflections, I want to first of all make sure that I'm not trying to put any dots on I, and I'm far from having a prepared, ready-made answer as how to reconcile this. What maybe the time is asking of us all, and what is also always somehow beyond the reach of time. So this is why when sitting like this, in the moment of a repose, it seems that what can be said, what can be spoken about, it is so obvious, it's just there, always. That deep inner sense of connection, that deep inner sense of everything is okay. But that's not the case with all of us. And also this, at the very same time, can be challenged by voices out there that this feels like a cop-out. This is bypassing, this is just withdrawing oneself from the necessity of having the greater insight into what is happening to us as the world at large. And this brings me to the rise of that movement, sometimes within the spiritual communities of the West, which was loosely dubbed spiritual activism. It was very similar and kind of had a lot of shared territory with what was also known as spiritual ecology. It didn't happen that long ago. I remember the first time I have encountered these conversations was around 2012, when I was in California and I've met a lot of wonderful people. One such conversation unfolded with a great Sufi master of our time, Llewellyn von Lee, with whom I became acquainted, and later it kind of touched these grounds of friendship. Some correspondence exchanges followed. We also had met the following year, again in California, in his own hermitage. And Llewellyn presented me with the book entitled Spiritual Ecology, which he has edited under a cover, selection of essays with about, 12 maybe, other authors, all very well known, including those who are no longer with us, like people like Thich Nhat Hanh, for example. So this spiritual activism, this other parallel movement, which had a lot of shared territory with what spiritual ecology was trying to address, that line of understanding, that tradition of witnessing it all, holding it all in one's own awareness, holding it all in one's own field, simply observing it, simply bearing a witness is enough, was challenged by a new perspective that somehow that's not enough. This is not going to cut it. This is not really taking us out of deep, deep doldrum that we gotten ourselves in, and it's only get thicker and thicker as we get along, and we can see that none of the institutions, none of the organizations, none of the appointed bodies, in terms of that what collective consciousness came up with, are capable of functioning in delivering what is their main tenets, what they were set up for in the first place. I don't want to start mentioning all these organizations, United Nations, and all these organizations, blocs, committees and communities that have been formed with tremendous degree of confidence back in the days, that's supposed to take us outside of that, what everyone understood by then was the world which going from bad to worse, in the face of that collectively shared horror that the Second World War was, rising to this a temporal window, or rising through that temporal window of counterculture of the 60s, which didn't last long enough, because in less than 2 decades, a very different sentiment and a very different incentives took over collective consciousness. And we have found ourselves again submerged in that feeling of uncertainty in the face of tomorrow, that deep sense of insecurity in the sense of where are we heading? Is there any shared ideology that unites us? Or this sense of fragmentation, this factual fragmentation, which paradoxically is going on side by side with increased globalization and what it represents as that force driven by faith in technology. I don't want to go too much off this main kind of line of inquiry, but it would be, I think, helpful to remind ourselves when these ideas took us as a humanity, as it were, not only by storm, but by now by our throats. The throats, the very area of communication, the formidable Vishuddhi chakra. This is the domain of ether. This is where we're supposed to experience the first taste of real freedom, no longer bound by greater solidity of other elements. And yet these ideas that somehow rose within the minds that were delving into this, that it is the technology that brings the answers to the dilemmas we're faced with. And the progress became to be equated with technological breakthroughs. I mean, I don't want to start boring anyone here, because all of you know very well how this is not true at all. Equating progress with technological development and how wired and how gadgeted we are is perhaps the deepest delusion that we as moderns now enshrouded ourselves with. It's the delusion out of which seems nearly impossible to extricate oneself, because it's a very seductive delusion as well. It's a very seductive idea. This is even what's happening right now, paradoxically, is only possible because of that technological breakthrough. So of course, it has this complete and utter catch-22. It completely has this chain-like connections that links it all together somehow. And this is the metaphor of the, being held by our throats. Not at the gunpoint, but by our throats, literally, gradually suffocating ourselves with that what's supposed to open greater possibility, greater sense of freedom, greater sense of communication. These ideas, of course, rose a long time ago. These ideas can be traced back to the Industrial Revolution and a gradual break away from connection to the soil. Gradual, but at the same time rapid break from connection to the geocentric understanding, from the understanding that we, human beings, are inseparable from the consciousness of the Gaia, inseparable from the consciousness of this planet with all its atmospheres as the spheres, atmospheres, these spheres where the atmos, literally, this is where all the souls reside in various degrees of density, all the way down to the earth element, down to the earth, where everything is, where the culmination, we could say, if we are to get supported by some of the philosophical traditional perspectives, taking its rightful unfoldment. Not that I'm dismissing the perspectives that the earth is a place where we are set to somehow continue our evolution, let alone this religious perspective that we were pushed down somehow to the earth to cultivate that because we somehow fell out of favor, fell out of grace from the more refined realms of being. I stand on perspectives which are shared by the Shaiva, which is basically the worship of the goddess. Shaiva, Tantric Shaivism, is the worship of Shakti. Shaiva in Sanskrit in itself is path of Shakti. So this path of Shakti is the path of the goddess, and the earth is the manifestation of the goddess where everything is. For that, the whole creation, the whole unfoldment, the whole evolution, the whole cosmos, everything is just an entourage for being on this planet at this very time. Everything is a wonderful, magnificent backdrop. Macrocosm and microcosm here unite, meet, intermingle. This is where the divine and mortals meet. This is where the celestials and the terrestrials gather together. It's the place of extraordinary beauty, of extraordinary simplicity and extraordinary possibilities. And yet, somehow, these ideas are the ideas of technocratism, ideas of technological advancement, that somehow we've outlived this organic, natural, earth-bound, so to speak, civilizations. We are now ready to expand, fly out of the cradle, fly out of the nest, as some would have it. The nest, flying out of this. After all, that Tsiolkovsky said, right, that if the earth is the cradle, of human race, you cannot spend your life staying in the cradle. The father of all the rocket industry, the father of cosmic programs, had this somehow. And of course, these ideas were shared by, not just by scientists, it was a culturally shared ideal, culturally shared consensus, which gradually became as the very raison d'etre, the very motivational force where we as human beings are going. In other words, with religion by large, in terms of its importance, influence, significance, falling on a background, not that it became irrelevant, of course religion relevant today even for billions of people out there, but it no longer played that role that religion played up to, let's say, the ages of science. And these ages of science replaced the age of religion. And this age of science became a new institutionalized religion, became a new form to reconnect, to reunite. So whatever religion was there as its purpose fell on the background. And new covenant, new ideas, new Noah's arcs, new ideologies, the ideologies of survival, the ideologies of somehow scarcity that the planet represents with all its resources. Sooner or later, one would have to learn to live it. I myself watched plenty of these films, even in the last 10 years. I'm not talking about all these older books and stories, but I'm talking about even what have been created in the last maybe 10, 15 years. Wonderful movies, amazing actors, amazing screenplays. Extraordinary, of course. But how does that really relate to here and now? How does that relate to this, what we are facing now with all of us together, collectively? In a sense that we no longer are under any illusion that the course that our civilization took is leading us absolutely nowhere, because it no longer even provides any of the ideological, motivational, somehow, compasses. It's no longer giving us the sense of why and what and how and what it is at all for. It simply has its own momentum. It has energy of its own. It spun so fast and now spinning in its own velocity, and it has its own propensity, and all these attempts at trying to estimate, evaluate, and understand where we all collectively going, where is it leading us, whether this is leading us anywhere, whether this is somehow a better world awaiting for us, because somehow, somewhat, and someone will solve these problems that we all now are faced with. Because these, let's face it, pockets, these pockets of paradise, this little personally somehow inhibited bubble that I chose to gave it as a form to these reflections, being here now, living in Mallorca, on the island in the Mediterranean, coveted, wonderful spot, if you can get yourself here, and if you can get together to be able to sustain yourself here, because it's not at all that easy. It's very rural, down to earth, but life is not cheap here. And also, it's very convenient in many ways. You can fly to any capital within an hour, maximum an hour and a half. Any capital of Europe. So, this is why millions of people pass through the island just during the summer holiday season. Are there many bubbles like this that are going to be the islands of survival? I'm not sure it's going to work like that. So, what's that got to do with where we have started, this spiritual activism? What does it provide? Does it give us any real, tangible possibility for changing the course of time, redirecting our collectively shared aspirations? Do we even understand what it means to redirect collectively shared aspirations? Do we even have collectively shared aspirations, or all this is just an illusion, somehow a bluff, that beneath these aspirations there are some other, much more sinister, selfishly driven aspirations, which have nothing to do with how it was all dressed. At first maybe dressed in terms of that grand idea of why we need cosmos and why we need to develop cosmos, because it brings somehow an alternative possibilities. And in the meantime we were severely messing up the soil which everything we eat comes from. Everything we nourish ourselves on a physical level comes from the soil and the state of the soil. This is the core questions of both spiritual ecology and spiritual activism, or so it should be. Soil here is not just some kind of object of our exploration and exploitation. Soil is not some just conglomerate of chemical composite that allow us to work on skillfully in a lab to turn it into our advantages so that we can solve once and for all so-called food shortages on the planet, so that we can have abundance on our tables, so that there's no starvation, no hunger, and nobody goes without the food. No, it never worked like that, and it never will. So the choice is for us, if we are to live on this planet, unless someone has already found another planet and has an idea of how to relocate us all there, or maybe just a few of us there, because all of us will be impossible. Few fortunate, few, right? Fortunate in every way. Then I'd like to hear that. Where is that planet? I, for one, even if the choice was given, don't want to relocate anywhere. I don't want to move an inch away from the ground here. This is my personal philosophy. It's an understanding that I've arrived very early on in my life. Actually, earlier than this was turned into understanding. I've arrived into that understanding already as a kid, even while still being fascinated by all the stories of extraterrestrial travel, of all the stories of how one can pierce the distance of light years. Of course, I wasn't immune as a kid to all that, nor do I suggest that this was all a waste of time. After all, we're here to imagine and break the confines of what thought can do or not. But sooner or later, it becomes apparent that we are somewhere here, somewhere where we need to be fully aware that this is the moment in time where, historically speaking, even if the history has finished and we no longer live in such framework of understanding what history used to be referred to as, it is the time when we can no longer think about finding qualitative solutions to problems on any of the levels of where these problems are, touching every spectrum of our lives, without all-encompassing perspectives, without all-encompassing understanding of how everything is interconnected. Hence that understanding of geocentrism. Because geocentrism, if properly understood, is far from an outlived, archaic ideas replaced with more advanced understanding of the cosmos. The more advanced our understanding, in fact, of the cosmos is, the more we understand that all there is this. All there is this. And everything else, as I said, is an entourage to what is taking place in this subjective experience of being here and now, on this planet, in this body, on this particular spot, where everything unfolds. The whole drama of life unfolds here and nowhere else. So I'm not going to go to heck with the Mars exploration, Lunar exploration, so forth, Jupiter exploration. This is not up to me to go into this, because there'll be plenty of voices that would dismiss my understanding on the grounds of me not having enough knowledge of what goes into this. But as far as these concepts of what can an individual do right now in the face of all that what we are collectively facing, it's an interesting one. In particular, in relation to what form of activism can really work. Where is the strongest impact our actions bring? That's what matters most. What is the source of these actions? Where these actions are rooted? If our actions are rooted in only level of ideations and mind vibrations, then it's a reshuffling by applying the same set of understanding which brought us here, paraphrasing Albert Einstein's words. We cannot work with the set of same solutions. We cannot come up with solutions operating with the same set of ideas that got us here. It's as clear as the day. So where then can these solutions come from? That's a good question. Well, if we understand that there is this field of pure potentialities, in Tantra it is spoken of as the field of Shakti, the field of pure potentialities. In other words, it's the field of pure energy. And that field of pure energy contains in itself everything, not just currently unfolded ideas. It contains in itself absolutely all ideas that have ever existed, currently exist, and will ever exist at any of the levels of existence. This is what the field of pure potentiality really represents. And that path of Shaiva, that path of the goddess, is being able to richly draw from that field of pure potentiality, for which, in the first place, we need to be plugged fully into that field, even though we are nothing other than a byproduct, a result, a manifestation of what's taking place in that field. No matter how paradoxically this sounds, unless we have direct access to that field of pure potentiality, unless we are connected to that subtle field of energy, nothing of value can come through us, through our minds, through our ideas. It can only come from a place where we can immerse ourselves again into the field of the unknown. So it's not about pondering endlessly about something. It's not about trying to see the picture from this side, from that angle, trying to penetrate this problem or that problem with this set of solutions. It's not about how clever you are or how amazingly informed you are. This will not suffice. This is my understanding. What is required now more than ever is as many human beings as it is only possible to connect to that field of pure potentiality on a daily, hourly basis. This is what it means in terms of tantric language to speak of requirement number one. That is, we need to have awakened consciousness for the solutions to come on their own. Not because we somehow aching for these solutions, although there's no need to hide this. We may be eager, we may open up ourselves, we may even beg for these solutions. But these solutions can only come as a spontaneous, natural outcome of being plugged, immersed into that field of pure potentialities. Field where everything is in a state of pure and utter possibility. Literally, in a molten state, not casted out into anything yet at the level of formation, where everything is molten, back to the state of homogeneity. This is state of transcendence. In that state of transcendence, where consciousness molten back onto its own primal state of that golden substance, it can then begin to find way of how to bring to the manifestation what is most needed, most required. Otherwise, the propensity to follow that set on trajectory, following that same velocity, which is what is taking place right now, is all there is. It's unstoppable. In a way, no matter how somber this may sound, it cannot be stopped. It cannot be halted by force. It will have to unfold. It will have to bear the fruits, the consequences of our intentions, the consequences of certain formed ideas and ideologies will have to play themselves out. Horrifying or not, a picture, it is the true perspective on what is taking place right now in the world. So we cannot even begin to put a blame on this or that organization, on this or that country, let alone on this or that individual. There is no body in particular that is responsible for what we are all collectively living through now. This responsibility, if you will, squarely shared by us, all of us, squarely shared, distributed equally. If we are to understand this from the perspective of pure subjectivity, of what it means to be here, alive, as consciousness that is embodied, equipped with organs of cognition for the marvel of this experience, to partake in it all, in the extraordinary act of that partaking, of that sharing. But the incentive, along with the intention towards rising of the new structure out of collapsing, outlived world, requires a certain percentage of awakened hearts, the hearts that carry in themselves, in the active way, the aliveness enough in them to make an impact, to make a qualitative enough impact. So if we are to speak of sacred activism, or spiritual activism, this has to be spoken from a place of understanding of what it really truly means. Otherwise, we might be taken in for another ride. And not that I'm somehow skeptical about what New Age comes up with, and New Age comes up with a lot of solutions to all problems, all the time, constantly. But unless it is rooted in the understanding that qualitative changes don't come from the surface level of affairs, never will and never did. These qualitative changes can only come from a place of how alive each and every one of us, how alive, how much aliveness, how alive that field of pure potentiality in you and in myself. Then this world is already on the rise. The new world is already on the rise. It's already rising. We don't see yet its outlook. We do not see its shape. We may sense, some of us may have greater gift, greater insights in how it will feel. We may not have a full picture. And in fact, it's impossible to have a full picture, because this is not how we build a temple. It's not that we have a set of tools and a set of objects out of which the temple will be built. That new culture, the blocks out of which this new culture is being built, is being formed out of that field of pure potentialities through each and every one of us as we awaken to the greater reality of who we are. And that is the work of a true architect, not a contractor, not someone who works at the level of using what is already there, and one's creativity is confined to this or that shape, confined to this or that size, parameters. out of which to form this newly built temple. It will be built out of newly coming into the shape forms unknown to us, and how they will sit together is a subject to that coherence that naturally and organically unfolds on its own. That's the way nature builds. That's the way nature creates. So let me know your own feelings, your own insights. Feel free to share them here under this video, as well as bringing in the challenging perspectives that will introduce something else. Because, as I have pointed out, this is to open up a dialogue, hence it's given to a form of reflections. I'd love to come back to this more and more. For example, I'd love to go and delve deeper into the meaning of the soil, which in our current day and age is utterly and entirely desacralized. And the manifestation of that is aplenty out there. Rapid collapse of our well-being and health is directly and proportionately related to the state of the soil, because it's a mutual, sacred connection that we have severed by objectifying the earth as something to exploit, as an object of our exploitation. And that is the biggest mistake. Mistake for which we are paying right now. So unless attempts are made to reconcile this relationship, unless we somehow bring that intention back into the possibility of bringing that sacredness into our relations with the world we live in, back into the earth, I don't know what's going to come of us. But I don't see any other merging. I don't see myself merging with somehow artificial intelligence of a digitized world. That's not something I fancy for myself, or for my children, or for my grandchildren. Thank you.